The ship came out of faster-than-light travel, like a knife cutting through silk. It was not the largest ship in the docking bay. It was not the most decorated. It did not have the glowing crystal towers of the Solhari vessels, or the massive bone-plated hull of the Grakthar warships. It was a simple gray-blue ship with clean lines and a single emblem on its side, a blue circle with a map of a small world printed on it. Earth. The asterisk U's unbroken drifted into docking bay 7 of the Galactic Conclave station, and for a moment, the crew working the bay just stared at it. It was so plain, so simple. The docking officers exchanged glances. This was the ship humanity had sent to represent itself at the most powerful political gathering in the known galaxy. Inside the ship, Ambassador Yara Soli stood in front of a mirror and fixed the collar of her jacket. She was a small woman with sharp brown eyes, dark hair pulled back tight, and the kind of face that never gave away what she was thinking. She had spent 23 years in Earth's diplomatic corps. She had negotiated trade deals in war zones, sat across tables from people who wanted her dead, and once talked 3 different armed groups into a ceasefire using nothing but a pot of coffee and 4 hours of patience. She was not nervous. Behind her, her assistant, a young man named Davo, was absolutely terrified. "Ambassador," he said, his voice a little too high. "The latest briefing says the Vrethkai High Speaker himself will be at the welcome ceremony. That's like the galactic equivalent of a head of state showing up personally." "I know," Soli said. She turned from the mirror. "Good." Davo blinked. "Good. It means they're paying attention." She picked up her small black case and walked toward the exit ramp. "Come on, we don't want to be late." The welcome hall of the Galactic Conclave was enormous. It could have fit several football stadiums inside it and still had room left over. The ceiling was so high it had its own weather, thin wisps of white cloud drifting near the top. The floor was polished stone that had been taken from 100 different worlds, each section a different color, making the whole thing look like a living map of the galaxy. Hundreds of beings moved through the hall. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Some had 4 legs or 6. Some floated. Some rolled. Some moved in ways that had no easy human description. The air was full of sounds, clicks, hums, deep bass vibrations that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. Solis walked through all of it with her hands clasped behind her back, looking calm and interested, like someone visiting a fascinating museum. Davo walked behind her, trying very hard not to trip over his own feet while staring at a species that appeared to be made entirely of slow-moving fire. They were guided to the central ceremony floor, where the official welcome for new conclave members was held. A small group of human staff, 6 people in total, stood together and waited. The other species representatives were already there. The Vrethkai delegation stood in a cluster near the front. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with dark polished exoskeletons that shone like oil on water, 4 arms each, and compound eyes that caught light like broken glass. Their movements were precise and deliberate, like machines that had learned to pretend to be alive. The Grakthar Dominion representatives stood across from them. They were built like tanks, wide, scaled, with heavy jaws and small red eyes that moved constantly, always watching, always measuring. They wore military dress with medals that ran from shoulder to hip. The Solhari were harder to look at directly. They were ancient, older than most of the other species in the room combined, and they looked it. Their bodies were slow and crystalline, pale and translucent, and they moved with the careful deliberateness of something that had decided long ago that there was no real reason to hurry. There were others too, smaller species, quieter ones, species that stood near the edges of the room and watched the powerful ones with careful eyes. The ceremony began. The Vrethkai High Speaker, a being called Zealshar, stepped forward to speak. His voice came through the translation device as deep and smooth, like a news anchor who had been doing the job for 1,000 years. He spoke about the galaxy, about its long history, about the conclave and what it meant for peace and cooperation and the advancement of all life. He spoke about how many species had walked through these doors before, young and uncertain, and how the older races had guided them, protected them, helped them find their place. And then he turned to the human delegation. "Humanity," Zielshar said, and his compound eyes settled on Solis in a way that felt both respectful and slightly pitying. "You come to us as a young species. You are new to the stars. You are new to the realities of what exists beyond your small world. The galaxy is large and it is not always kind." He paused for effect. "Fear not. We have watched your struggles from afar. We have seen your wars, your pain, your remarkable and chaotic will to survive, and we have made a decision." The hall was very quiet. "We shall extend our protection over your worlds." Polite applause moved through the hall like a slow wave. Other species nodded their heads or vibrated their equivalent of approval. It was, by all conclave tradition, an enormous honor. The Vrethkai did not offer protectorate status lightly. It meant resources, guidance, a seat at tables that young species normally couldn't access for centuries. Every species that had ever been offered it had accepted immediately, and with deep gratitude. Zielshar looked at Yara Solis and waited for the gratitude. Solis smiled. It was a perfectly warm smile, practiced and genuine-looking, the kind of smile that said absolutely nothing about what was happening behind her eyes. "On behalf of Earth and all of humanity," she said, her voice clear and steady in the large hall, "we are deeply honored by your words, High Speaker. We look forward to learning more." More applause. The ceremony moved on. Food was brought out, or things that passed for food depending on your biology. Music played from instruments no human had ever seen before. Davo leaned close to Solis as they stood near a table of strange drinks. "That went well," he whispered. "Right, that was good." Solis lifted a glass and studied the liquid inside it. "Ask me again in a week," she said quietly. Later, aboard the Asterisk, use Unbroken Asterisk, in the secure communications room, Solis sat down in front of the transmission panel. She typed a message back to Earth Command on the encrypted channel. She did not write a long report. She did not list the names of who was present or describe the ceremony in detail. She sent 3 words. "They just did it." In the Deep Operations Command Center on Earth, 17 floors underground, Admiral Kenzo Murakami was sitting at his desk reviewing fleet movement reports when the message came through. He read it once. He set it down. He leaned back in his chair until it creaked. And then he laughed. It was a long laugh. Not a mean laugh, not a cruel one. It was the laugh of a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time, and it had finally arrived exactly the way he expected it would. His aide looked up from across the room. "Sir." Murakami wiped his eye. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," he said, "and someone get coffee, the real stuff." He picked the message up again and read it one more time, still smiling. "It's going to be a long night." Outside the command center, deep in their underground bunkers and orbital stations, in the quiet labs and the loud shipyards and the sprawling military academies, humanity had absolutely no idea what was coming. But some of them, the ones who had read enough history, who had studied enough patterns, who had sat in enough rooms with powerful people who smiled too wide and offered gifts wrapped in chains, some of them would have understood immediately. The galaxy had just made its first mistake. The documents arrived on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesday meant anything on the conclave station. The station did not orbit a star. It had no sunrise or sunset, no seasons, no natural way to measure the passing of days. But Yara Solis had kept her internal clock set to Earth Standard Time, and when the formal package from the Vrethkai legal office was delivered to the human delegation's quarters, her wristwatch said it was a Tuesday morning. The package was large. It was printed on what looked like thick cream-colored paper, but was actually some kind of compressed material that never creased or tore. The cover page had the official conclave seal, a circle of stars, and beneath it, in 47 different languages including English, were the words, Protectorate Integration Agreement, Standard Form. Solis carried it to the small table in the delegation's meeting room and sat down. She poured herself a cup of coffee, real coffee, brought from Earth, because she had learned decades ago that some comforts were not luxuries but necessities. She opened the document and began to read. Her face did not change. It never did when she was reading something important. Davo sat across from her, pretending to work on his own tablet but mostly watching her face for signs of what to feel. When she got to page 12, he saw her jaw tighten, just slightly, just for a second before her expression settled back into calm. "What is it?" he asked. She turned the document around and pushed it across the table to him, without a word. Davo read. His eyebrows climbed slowly toward his hairline. By page 8 he had stopped breathing normally. By page 12 he looked like someone had told him the ship had a small problem, and the small problem was that it no longer had an engine. The Protectorate Agreement, the thing that had been presented to them in that grand hall as an honor, as a gift, as the warm embrace of older and wiser beings, was, in the language of people who had spent their careers reading fine print, a cage. Under Section 4, humanity would be required to submit all military development programs to the Conclave Security Council for review and approval. Any new weapon system, any new ship design, anything that could theoretically be used in a conflict, all of it had to be approved by a council that was, not coincidentally, controlled by the Vrethkai and the Grakthar Dominion. Under Section 7, Earth would hand over its faster-than-light navigation codes to the Conclave's Central Transit Authority for the purposes of safe and coordinated travel. This sounded reasonable until you understood that those codes were also the keys to Earth's entire FTL network. Whoever held them could, in theory, shut it down. Under Section 9, humanity could not establish any new colony on any world without first applying to the Conclave Expansion Committee, a process that, according to the footnote on page 41, took an average of 60 to 80 standard years to complete. And underneath all of it, buried in the language of Section 14, was the piece that made the whole thing clear. Any protectorate species that attempted to exit the agreement before a period of 200 standard years had passed would be considered in violation of conclave law. The consequences were listed in a separate appendix. They were not small consequences. Davo put the document down. He searched for the right word. "A leash," Solis said simply. She picked up her coffee again. "We can't sign this." "No. But they'll expect us to. Every species before us signed it." "Yes." Davo looked at her. "What do we do?" Solis looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at the ceiling, as if she could see through the station and out into the stars beyond. "We send it home," she said. Zielshar arrived personally to collect the signed agreement 3 days later. This was unusual. Normally such things were handled by junior staff, but the Vrethkai High Speaker had taken what he considered a personal interest in humanity. They were an odd species, chatty and emotional, but earnest enough, and he wanted to complete this step himself. He found Ambassador Solis in the delegation meeting room, sitting at the same table with the document in front of her, still unsigned. Zielshar's compound eyes moved over the scene. He settled into the large chair across from her that had been built for Vrethkai proportions. "Ambassador," he said, "I trust you have had time to review the agreement." "I have," she said. "It is a standard document. Every protected species receives the same terms." "I know." Solis folded her hands on top of the document. "I'll need to send this home first." Zielshar was quiet for a moment. One of his 4 hands moved slightly, a small gesture, something between confusion and patience. "Home," he repeated. You mean to your government? Yes. Ambassador, I say this respectfully. What could your government add to this conversation that you cannot? You are here. You are the representative of your species. Solis smiled at him. It was the same smile from the ceremony, warm, readable as a blank wall. That's how we do things, she said. We don't sign documents like this without full consultation at home. It's in our charter. Zilshar looked at her for a long moment. His kind had been negotiating with young species for 400 years. They were always nervous. They were always grateful. They sometimes asked for small modifications, a clause adjusted here, a timeline extended there. But they never simply said we'll send it home as if there were any real chance the answer would be anything other than yes. Of course, he said finally and stood. We look forward to hearing from Earth. After he left, Davo let out a breath he had been holding for the entire meeting. He thinks they're going to sign it, he said. Yes. What's actually going to happen when it gets home? Solis was already opening her secure communication panel. Let me show you something, she said. She pulled up a file that had come through on the encrypted channel that morning and turned the screen toward him. It was a satellite image, from orbit, looking down at a stretch of open ocean somewhere on Earth's Pacific coast, except it wasn't just ocean. It was a carefully cleared zone, and in that zone there were ships. Not the simple commercial vessels that carried cargo between ports. These were long and dark and shaped like things that were designed not to be seen. She swiped to the next image, an orbital platform camouflaged in the debris field of what official maps still listed as a decommissioned satellite array. She swiped again, a facility carved into the side of a mountain in a range that most maps did not name. She swiped again, and again, and again. Davo stared at the screen. The galaxy, Solis said quietly, has been watching us for a long time, watching, studying, filing reports. They saw our wars, they saw our worst moments. She set the tablet down. What they didn't understand is that our worst moments were also our training. Every war we survived made us better at the next one. Every disaster made us build something stronger. She looked at the closed door through which Zilshar had just walked. They looked at us and saw a young species, fragile. New to the stars, she paused. They didn't look closely enough. Davo looked at the images again, then he looked at her. What do you think Earth is going to say? Solis picked up her coffee. It had gone cold, but she drank it anyway. I think, she said, that Earth is going to say exactly what needs to be said. 7 light-years away, on a planet with 1 moon and too much weather, Admiral Kenzo Murakami was reading the full Protectorate Agreement on a screen in his office. 2 senior generals sat across from him. A legal advisor sat to his left. A defense strategist was on the couch by the window. No one spoke for a while. Then Murakami set the document down, rubbed his face with both hands, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Section 14, one of the generals said. I saw it, Murakami said. 200 years. I saw it. The room was quiet again. Outside, through the reinforced window, you could see the edge of one of Earth's orbital defense platforms catching the last light of sunset, gleaming like a second moon. Murakami looked at his legal advisor. Draft the response. He looked at the defense strategist. Pull the full capability file, everything. I want it ready to transmit. He looked at both generals. And get me the full assembly contact list. If we're doing this, we're doing it in front of everyone. He stood up, walked to the window and looked up at the sky. They want to protect us, he said quietly. And there was something in his voice, not anger, not fear, just a kind of dry, patient amusement, like a man who had heard a joke he already knew the punchline to. He almost smiled. Almost. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Conclave could seat 4,000 beings. On the day of the full session, it was standing room only. Word had spread, quietly, through back channels and diplomatic networks, and the kind of hushed conversation that happens when something unusual is about to occur. that the human delegation had made an unusual request. They had invoked the Transparency Protocol, an old rule buried in the Conclave's original charter that gave any member species the right to address the full assembly on any matter affecting their status in the Conclave. It was a rule that almost no one ever used. It was designed for crises, for accusations, for moments when a species felt it had been treated unjustly and needed the entire galaxy to hear about it. Humans had used it to deliver their response to a routine protectorate offer. No one quite knew what to make of that, but everyone wanted to watch. Ambassador Soli stood at the front of the assembly floor in front of a transmission panel that had been set up per her specific request. She was dressed the same way she always was, clean jacket, no decorations, no medals, nothing that performed importance. She looked like someone who had showed up to do a job. Around her, in tiered seats that rose like the inside of a volcano, 4,000 representatives of 200 species watched and waited. The Vrethkai delegation sat near the front, Zealshar with his 4 arms folded in a careful display of composure. The Grakthar Dominion military attaches sat in their section with expressions that had not changed since they arrived, flat, hard, reading the room the way soldiers read a field before an engagement. The Solhari sat far up, barely visible, their pale crystalline forms very still. Solis looked at the room for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned to the transmission panel and opened the channel to Earth. The screen filled with a face. Admiral Kenzo Murakami was not a dramatic-looking man. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been weathered by years of responsibility without being broken by them. He wore his dress uniform, clean, dark, minimal, and he sat at a table with 2 other figures on either side of him, General Amara Oshino of the Terran Ground Forces and Admiral Priya Des of the Orbital Defense Command. Behind them, slightly out of focus, were others, advisors, officers, people who did not need to be identified to make the point that they were there. Murakami looked at the camera with calm, patient eyes. "Good morning," he said, in a tone you might use at the beginning of a meeting you had already prepared for completely. His voice filled the assembly hall through the translation system. "I understand we're being broadcast to the full conclave. Good. That saves time." He paused, looked down at something briefly, a document, face down on the table, then looked back up. "Humanity has received the Protectorate Integration Agreement from the Vrethkai High Office, offered through the Galactic Conclave. We have read it in full. We have reviewed every section, every clause, and every appendix." Another pause, a small tilt of the head. "We want to make sure we understand the situation correctly." He looked directly into the camera with the steady eyes of a man who had slept perfectly well the night before. "Are you threatening us?" The assembly hall did not explode. It did something stranger. It went completely silent for about 2 full seconds. And then from the transmission came the sound of laughter. Not one person laughing, several. The kind of laughter that had been held in for a long time that finally had somewhere to go. Warm, real, genuine laughter, not mocking, not arrogant, just the honest reaction of people who had read a document, looked at each other, and found the whole situation genuinely, deeply funny. Murakami himself was smiling, not a polite, diplomatic smile, a real one, the kind that reached the corners of his eyes. The silence in the assembly hall broke, not with applause or calm discussion, but with the sound of 4,000 beings processing something unexpected all at once. Species leaned toward each other. Translation devices worked overtime. The Vrethkai section was very, very still. Zealshar's compound eyes did not move. He was, in the way of his kind, not showing anything externally, but his second left hand, the one he was not aware he used when under stress, opened and closed once. Murakami let the moment settle. Then he continued, his voice easy and unhurried. "We are not signing the agreement as written," he said. "We are not transferring our navigation codes. We are not submitting our defense programs for outside review, and we are not accepting any clause that would prevent us from building, expanding, or protecting our people without asking permission first. He said all of this the way someone might read a grocery list. Plain, clear, done. What we are offering, he said, is this. He reached to one side and picked up a different document, not face down this one, but held up clearly for the camera. A mutual defense treaty, equal terms, shared benefits, no sovereignty transferred by either party. We help you when you need it. You help us when we need it. We sign, we shake hands or whatever the equivalent is, and we move forward as equals. He set the document down. That's the offer. Then he nodded to someone off-screen. Outside the conclave station, in docking bay 7, the asterisk use unbroken changed. The outer hull of the ship, the plain, gray-blue surface that docking officers had looked at 2 weeks ago and found so unremarkable, separated in long sections, each one folding back smoothly and quickly, like the petals of a flower opening in fast motion. What was underneath was not a diplomatic configuration. It was a warship. A real one, the kind that took years to build and a different kind of mind to design. Long-range rail accelerators ran along both flanks. Point defense turrets, dormant but visible, were placed at intervals along the hull. The drive section at the rear was not the civilian model the conclave sensors had logged on arrival. It was something else, larger, more complex, running on principles that the Grakthar Dominion's military analysts, who were very good at their jobs, had never seen before. The asterisk use unbroken had not come to the conclave armed, exactly. It had come asterisk capable. In the Grakthar section of the assembly hall, one of the military attachés leaned toward another and said something very quietly. The other one said nothing back. They both kept watching the screen. The Solhari, high up in their seats, were also watching. One of them, old, slow, crystalline, turned slightly toward a neighbor and made a sound. In Solhari culture, that sound had no direct translation. The closest meaning in any human language was something like, "Ah, there it is." The transmission from Earth continued. "One more thing," Murakami said. His voice had not changed. Still calm, still plain, still the voice of someone finishing a meeting that had gone exactly the way he expected. "We don't need protection. We appreciate the thought. We understand the tradition." He paused. "But we've been protecting ourselves for a very long time. We're quite good at it. If anything," and here the small smile came back, "you might find it's more useful to have us protecting you." He nodded at the camera once. "Professional, final, done. We'll leave the treaty on the table. Take your time." The transmission ended. For a long moment, the assembly hall was the loudest place in the known galaxy, not because of shouting or argument, though there was some of that, but because of the sheer volume of 4,000 beings all reacting at once. Some were alarmed. Some were furious. Several Grakthar attachés were already composing secure messages to their admirals. A cluster of smaller species near the back of the hall were talking very fast and very quietly among themselves, with expressions that looked, on their alien faces, something like relief. Zielshar sat very still. Solis turned from the transmission panel and faced the hall. She did not look triumphant. She did not look nervous. She looked like someone who had said the thing that needed to be said and was now waiting for the room to catch up. In the back of the hall, barely visible, one of the representatives from a small species called the Thalvi, soft-featured, feathered, quiet, sat with their hands in their lap and watched the humans with wide eyes. They did not look alarmed. They looked like someone who had just heard, for the first time in a long time, the sound of a door opening. The message came late at night, by Earth Standard Time, which was the only time that mattered to Yara Solis. It arrived on the secondary communication channel, not the official diplomatic line, which meant whoever sent it did not want it logged in the Conclave standard system. The message was short. It gave a location, a small meeting room on level 19, a part of the station used mostly for storage and secondary utility systems, and a time. It was signed with a name she did not recognize and a species designation she had to look up. Thalvi. She had noticed them in the assembly hall. The small, feathered beings near the back, with their careful eyes and their silence. She had filed them away in the part of her memory she reserved for things that were important but not yet understood. She went alone. She told Davo she was going for a walk, and when he started to follow, she looked at him once, and he sat back down. Level 19 smelled like recycled air and old metal. The corridors were narrow and lit by low orange strips along the floor. Solis walked quietly and found the room without trouble. Inside, sitting on a low bench built for a body shaped differently than hers, was an elder. Old, visibly, deeply old in the way that some beings carry age like weather, like something that has shaped every surface of them. The Thalvi were avian in appearance, light-boned, feathered, with large dark eyes and a stillness about them that felt less like calm and more like long practice at being still. The elder's feathers were white, faded at the tips. Their hands, four-fingered, delicate, were folded in their lap. Ambassador Solis, the elder said. The translation device on their collar rendered the voice as soft and slightly rough, like wind through dry grass. I am Elder Sovi. Thank you for coming. Solis sat down across from them on a plain metal chair. Thank you for the invitation. Sovi looked at her for a long moment. Not studying her, just looking. The way very old people sometimes look at things, as if they are checking whether something is real. 81 years ago, Sovi said at last, my people sat in a hall very much like the one you were in today. We were new to the conclave. We were frightened. The stars were enormous and we were small. A pause. The Vrethkai offered us their protection. We were grateful. We signed. Solis said nothing. She listened. At first it was not so bad, Sovi continued. We received help, resources, guidance. We were given seats on committees and invited to events. We felt very lucky. The elder's dark eyes moved to the floor, then back up. Then the requests began, small ones at first. Could we redirect some of our trade routes through Vrethkai-managed corridors? Could we share data from our agricultural satellites? Could we delay a colony ship launch until certain logistics were resolved? The old hands moved in a small gesture. There was always a reason. It was always reasonable. And before we understood what was happening, our colony ship had been waiting 18 years. Our trade surplus had become a trade debt. Our satellite data was being used to price resources in markets we had no access to. The elder paused. We were still being protected. We simply had nothing left worth taking. The room was very quiet. I watched you today, Sovi said, and something changed in their voice, something that was less sorrow and more a careful, fragile kind of hope. I watched you sit in front of all of them and laugh. The elder's head tilted slightly. I have been at this station for many years. I have never seen a species laugh. Solis looked at the elder for a moment. It seemed like the right response. How did you know? Sovi asked. The question was plain and direct and very serious. How did you know you were strong enough to say no? The question sat between them. Solis did not answer immediately. She thought about it the way she thought about all important things, not quickly, not for show, but actually. We didn't, she said, not completely. She leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on her knees. We've been saying no to people who were bigger than us for a very long time. Empires, dictators, anyone who showed up and said your world is ours now. Sometimes we lost, sometimes very badly. She paused, but we kept saying it, and somewhere along the way it became the thing we were best at. She looked at the elder steadily. We didn't know we were strong enough. We just decided that we were, and we acted like it, and then we made it true. Elder Sovi was quiet for a long time. The faint hum of the station systems filled the silence. There are others, Sovi said at last, 11 other protectorate species. Some have been under the agreement for decades, some, like us, for generations. Some have forgotten what it was like before. The old hands moved again, but some have not forgotten, and today, watching your transmission, I think some of them are remembering. The elder looked at her with those large, dark eyes. Would you speak with them? if they reached out. Yes, Solis said, without hesitating. The next 2 weeks were busy in ways that did not appear in any official conclave record. Solis met with a representative from the Leth, a six-limbed species, quiet and intellectual, who had been under protectorate status for 40 years, and had come to accept their slow economic decline as simply the nature of things. When Solis showed them a clause-by-clause breakdown of how the agreement had been used against them, the Leth representative sat very still for a long time, and then said, in a very calm voice, that they would like to speak with their home government. She met with a delegate from the Murren, a small, nocturnal species who had wanted to expand their colony network for 30 years, and kept being told by the Conclave Expansion Committee that their applications were still being reviewed. She met with others. Some were cautious, some were angry, some were afraid. All of them had the same quality she had seen in Elder Sovi, the look of someone who had learned to sit very still for a very long time and was not quite sure yet whether it was safe to move. She did not tell them what to do. She did not make promises she could not keep. She shared information. She explained what the legal options were. She sat across tables and listened to stories that were all, underneath the different languages and biologies, the same story. We were told this was protection and we believed them, and by the time we understood what it actually was, we could not see a way out. She told each of them the same thing she had told Elder Sovi, not that it would be easy, not that there was no risk, just that the decision to say no was available to them, that it had always been available, that the only thing keeping them from it was the belief that they were not strong enough to survive the consequences. Meanwhile, the Vrethkai and the Grakthar Dominion were not sitting still. Zielshar filed 3 formal motions with the Conclave Legal Committee in the 2 weeks following the Assembly session. The first was a motion to classify humanity's behavior as a breach of diplomatic protocol. The Legal Committee declined to act on it. The second was a motion to suspend humanity's provisional member status pending review. This one was debated, but the votes were not there. Too many species were watching closely now, and no one wanted to be seen moving against the new members for the crime of asking too many questions. The third motion was a request to have the UES Unbroken reclassified as a military vessel and removed from conclave docking. The morning that motion was filed, a second ship arrived. It parked in the outer system, far from the station, technically in neutral space, not docked anywhere. It did not do anything. It sent no messages, made no demands, interfered with no one. It simply sat there, patient and enormous, and existed. The Conclave's sensor teams filed a report. The ship's hull configuration matched nothing in their database. Its power signature was consistent with a vessel several classes above anything humanity was publicly known to operate. The motion regarding the asterisk use unbroken was quietly withdrawn. In her quarters late one evening, Solis received a message from Murakami, not official, personal channel. "How are you holding up?" he had written. She considered the question. She looked at the stack of documents on her small desk, the pages of notes, the list of names of people she had met with, and people she still needed to talk to. She looked out the small window at the stars, at the distant shape of the second ship, just barely visible as a point of reflected light. She typed back, "Ask me when it's done." A reply came almost immediately, "Fair enough. For what it's worth, they're scared. That's good. Scared people make mistakes. Careful people make plans." She smiled at that. Then she closed the channel, cleared her desk, and started on the next set of documents. There was still a lot of work to do. But in the quiet of level 19, in a small room with bad lighting and old metal walls, an elder named Sovi was sitting across from a fire they had not felt in 81 years. And they were not putting it out. The vote was held on a morning that felt like all the other mornings on the conclave station. No sunrise, no weather, just the steady hum of systems keeping thousands of beings alive in the middle of space. But the assembly hall was different that morning. It was full again. Not standing room, only the way it had been during the transmission, organized this time, deliberate, every seat filled by someone who had made a choice to be there. The atmosphere was not the electric, uncertain energy of a surprise. It was the quieter, steadier energy of something that had been a long time coming and had finally arrived. The motion on the floor was simple in its language and enormous in what it meant. Resolution 7 Gamma. The removal of the protectorate clause from the standard integration agreement, effective immediately for all current and future member species. It had been filed by the human delegation, co-sponsored by 7 other species. The Thalvi, the Leth, the Murren, and 4 others who had spent anywhere from 20 to 90 years under protectorate status, and had in the past 6 months found their voice again. Ambassador Solis stood at the speaker's platform on the assembly floor and delivered the opening statement. She did not speak for long. She did not use dramatic language or strong emotion. She laid out the facts in plain, clear language, what the protectorate clause was, what it did, how it had been used, and why it had no place in an organization that described itself as a gathering of equals. She spoke for 7 minutes. She thanked the assembly for their time. She sat down. Several other speakers followed. The Thalvi representative, not Elder Sovi, who had traveled home but had sent a written testimony that was read aloud in full, spoke about the 81 years of slow decline that the agreement had caused their people. The Leth representative presented data. Clean, careful, damning data. 3 other species spoke. Each one was different. Each one was the same story. The Vrethkai High speaker, Zielshar, spoke in opposition. He was careful and measured as always. He spoke about stability, about the protection that younger species genuinely needed, about the risks of allowing chaotic or unprepared civilizations to operate without structure. He was persuasive. He had done this for a very long time. But the room had changed. The species that might once have nodded along without question were listening differently now, asking questions internally that they had not thought to ask before, looking at the word asterisk protection and turning it over in their hands like an object they had always assumed they understood but now, looking more closely, were not so sure about. The debate lasted 4 hours. When the vote came, the final count was 144 in favor of removing the protectorate clause, 41 against, and 17 abstentions. The conclave had not passed a structural reform in 300 years. The news traveled across the galaxy at the speed of light. The signing ceremony was held the following week. Not a grand event, Solis had specifically requested that it not be. A medium-sized room, good lighting, chairs that fit multiple body types and no speeches. Just the document, the signatures, and the people who had made it happen. Afterward, in the corridor outside the room, Zielshar approached Ambassador Solis. She saw him coming and stopped walking. She did not reach for anything, did not signal to Davo, did not change her expression. She simply waited. Zielshar stood before her. He was a full meter taller than she was, with 4 arms and compound eyes and an exoskeleton that had seen 400 years of galactic politics. He looked at her for a moment with his unreadable insect face. "You could have failed," he said. His voice through the translation device was quiet, not hostile, just honest, in the way that very old beings sometimes are when they have stopped caring about appearances. "You were new. You were alone. You had no alliances and no guaranteed support. If your ship had not been what it was, if you had been bluffing and we had called it, you would have had nothing." Solis looked up at him. "Yes," she agreed. "You could have simply accepted the agreement. It would have been safer. In 10 years you would have had full resources, full access. You would have been comfortable." "Comfortable," she repeated, as if she were testing the weight of the word. "You gambled everything on a laugh," he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite admiration and not quite bafflement, but lived somewhere between the two. Solis was quiet for a moment. "You looked at us," she said, And you saw a young species, new to the stars. You saw our wars and our disasters and our 100,000 years of hurting each other, and you decided that made us weak. She tilted her head slightly. We looked at all of that and learned to build things that could survive it. We looked at every time someone put a chain on us and learned exactly how chains work so we could break the next one. She paused. You didn't gamble anything because you thought you already knew the answer. We gambled everything because we had done it before, and we knew something you didn't. Zielshar's second left hand opened and closed once, the same small movement she had noticed in the assembly hall months ago. What did you know? That the most dangerous moment for whoever is holding the leash, she said simply, is the moment the other person stops being afraid of it. Zielshar looked at her for a long time. Then he did something she had not expected. He inclined his head slowly, deliberately, in what she recognized from her research was a Vrethkai gesture of genuine acknowledgement. Not submission, not defeat, something older and more considered than either of those things. He walked away without another word. Davo caught up with her in the corridor a few minutes later. He was slightly out of breath, as he usually was when he had been watching something unfold from a distance and trying to figure out how he felt about it. What did he say? Davo asked. He said we gambled, Soli said, walking. Did we? She thought about it honestly. She thought about the months of back-channel meetings, about the legal work, about the second ship that had sat quietly in the outer system and said nothing and been understood perfectly. She thought about Murakami's calm voice in a transmission room, and Elder Sovi's hands folded in a dim corridor on level 19, and a vote that had passed in a hall that had not changed in 300 years. Not really, she said. Gambling is when you don't know the odds. She glanced at him. We did the math. On Earth, in the underground command center, Admiral Murakami watched the broadcast of the signing ceremony on a small screen in the corner of his office. He watched the vote count come in. He watched the corridor footage of Solis and Zielshar, no audio on that part, just two figures talking quietly in a hall, one enormous and ancient, one small and composed. When the broadcast ended, he sat quietly for a moment. His aide knocked on the open door. Sir, the Leth ambassador has officially requested a meeting with our trade office. Murin Colony Authority has filed a new expansion application through the conclave, CC'd our delegation as co-sponsor, and the Thalvi Elder Sovi has sent a message, personal for you. Murakami looked up. What does it say? The aide read from the paper. To Admiral Murakami of the Terran Defense Coalition, we have carried a silence for 81 years. Today it is a little lighter. Thank you. A pause. Signed, Elder Sovi of the Thalvi. The room was quiet for a moment. Murakami reached over and picked up the message. He read it once more himself. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket close. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was doing something it did most evenings in that part of the world, turning colors that had no names, going from blue to gold, to something between red and purple that humans had been watching since before they had words for it. Someone knocked on the door again. Logistics, fleet deployment schedules, the next 3 things on the list. He turned from the window. All right, he said, let's get to work. Somewhere in the galaxy, in a medium-sized hall with no windows and good lighting, 7 new signatures sat next to 8 old ones on a document that had removed a 300-year-old chain from galactic law. The galaxy had offered humanity a leash dressed up as a gift. Humanity had laughed, handed it back, and spent the next 6 months helping 11 other species remember that they were allowed to stand up straight. The conclave, for the first time in a very long time, was being run a little differently. And the humans, curious, stubborn, loud, strange, deeply inconvenient, and absolutely impossible to frighten, once they had decided not to be, had only just arrived. The galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Neither if anyone had asked them. Did the humans? But they were looking forward to finding out.